Hi, everyone. So today we are going to start talking about cells. Before we get started, as always, when we do this type of presentation, please make sure you also have your vocab notebook open and ready to go. That way you can always pause the video, you can look at the slide deck, and make sure that you are indeed filling in the different vocabulary words in your vocab notebook as you go. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about cells. I'm going into this under the assumption that you've already learned some stuff about cells from what I understand, especially in the Worcester district. You should have seen a lot of cells in 7th and 8th grade. So we're not going to be going too in depth. This is more of a review and also cluing you in to the stuff that we are going to be focusing on this year in terms of cells. So the big questions we're going to be looking at, I believe in you. There you go. Okay, thank you. The big questions we're going to be looking at are first, what are cells? We're going to be looking at how are certain cells similar and how are certain cells different. So we're going to be comparing and contrasting different types of cells. And then the most important question is, how do cells work? I'm going to come back to this, but the basic idea behind this question is that cells are the basic unit of life. So we ourselves as humans are made out of millions and billions of cells, and we need to understand how a cell works in order to understand how we work. So let's look at some different types of cells before we get started. So even before we get into different types of cells, like I said, let's talk about what a cell is in the first place. So a cell is the smallest unit of life. So keep in mind, we have atoms, which are the smallest unit of matter, and we have different types of atoms that are called elements. When we put these different elements and different atoms together, we create molecules. And from those molecules, we can put those together, and that eventually creates cells. Now, living things can be unicellular, so they are made out of just one cell, or things can be multicellular, which is what we are. We are made out of more than one cell. But the idea is that at the basic level, life starts with the cell. It cannot be alive if it is not made out of cells. So that brings us into this idea of cell theory. Number one says that all living things are composed of cells, which I just explained to you. Because they are the basic or smallest unit of life, that means that all living things are made out of at least one cell, if not many more. Number two in the cell theory is that cells are the basic unit and structure, cells are the basic unit of structure and function in an organism. And I touched on this as well. So structurally, like I said, we are made out of cells, and there's stuff inside of cells we're going to look at. So there's a certain structure, there's a certain way that cells are put together. And based on how cells are put together, that's also going to tell us how the cell does its job, how the cell functions. Now, in a unicellular organism, so an organism made out of one cell, we're talking about, just the structure and function of that one cell. So that one cell is the entire organism keeping it alive. When we get into more complex organisms, such as humans, multicellular organisms that also have organs, organ systems, different cells are going to have different specializations or different functions inside of our body. So we've already looked at a neuron, which is a type of cell in our nervous system. That neuron, its structure is very different from other cells so that it can function very differently from other cells. So the neuron's function is to communicate the brain and the rest of the body. And so it's put together in a way where it can send those messages and that communication can happen. So that's relating structure and function. As a side note, over the course of this year, this idea of relating the structure of something to its function, to its job, it's going to be reoccurring. It's a theme in biology. So the third part of cell theory is that cells come from the reproduction of existing cells. So this is sort of like a chicken and an egg scenario, which came first, the chicken or the egg. But the idea is that all living things have to come from other living things. So when we create more cells, that new cell has to come from an already existing cell. We're not going to get into like where the first cell was created just yet. We will be doing that later this year when we do look at the topic of evolution. So what I'm showing you here in this picture are the main two different types of cells. We can have a eukaryotic cell or we can have a prokaryotic cell. And a little bit later in this presentation, I will be going into details about what is what. But if we take all the cells in this entire world, we can divide them into the two categories of eukaryote and prokaryote. So that's cell and cell theory. Now, cells are really, really tiny, right? Like we don't look at a person and we're looking at an individual cell. We generally have to look at them underneath a microscope in order to see the individual cell. So the idea behind this, why cells are so small, let's think about neurons, okay? So neurons, their job is to send a message, their job is to communicate. And in order to send this message, we send an electrical signal that goes very quickly, and then we send a chemical signal between the neurons, which is slightly slower but still very quick. The reason why cells are so small is it provides what we call a large area to volume ratio, which means that in order to send a message, if we need to send materials across the cell or between cells, it's a shorter distance that these materials or this message has to travel. So because there's a shorter distance to cover, that message can be sent very quickly, versus if it's a longer message to cover, it takes a little bit longer to send the message. And then the other part of this is that cells come in different shapes and sizes. So I'm going to, this is a link if you want to go look at it in your own time, but this is the link that it's leading you to. And basically we're going to go through and look at all these different types of cells, look at the size, look at the shape. We'll talk about the function of these different types of cells. But the idea is I'm going to zoom in. This is telling us a level of magnification that we're looking at. So right now we're just at like our regular level of vision. This is just what we see in the everyday world. And the idea is we are going to zoom in to the top of this nail head right here and see all the different types of cells that can, number one, fit on top of that nail head. And like I said, we'll talk about what those cells do. So let's start zooming in. Yes. All right, so we're at 10 times magnification. This is like using a magnifying glass or like zooming in on your camera on your phone or something. But from here, we can start to see some stuff. So this line going across the nail head is a human hair. Okay, so you've probably all looked at like a strand of human hair before. This is at a level of 10 times magnification of what the human eye can see. You might also be able to start to see there's like a little speck over here. We're going to be zooming in because there's actually something there to look at. So let's keep going. Oh, here we go. So there it is. This is a dust mite. These guys are fun creatures. This is a multicellular organism, okay? So this is made out of multiple cells, but it is still very, very tiny. We can't see it with our naked eye. If you look down here, we're probably around 80 to 90 times magnification of what the human eye can see. It's just below 100. So they are very, very tiny. Now, the fun part about them is that they live all over you all the time. They are crawling all over you all the time. Anybody getting itchy yet? If you are, excellent. The idea is, and I have a little thing over here about them because I think they're kind of fun. I took this directly off of the website over here. But basically, dust mites, their description is they are quietly lurking within those dust bunnies under our beds, inside sofas, and carpet, are creatures too small to see without a microscope or strong magnifying glass. Dust mites are arachnids. So that's like similar to a spider. Oh, it says that. The class of arthropods, which includes spiders, scorpions, and ticks. So dust mites are similar to spiders, scorpions, and ticks. This is awesome. Dust mites feed on dead skin that slows from the bodies. So basically at all times, our outer layer of skin, it's called an epidermis, we're shedding dead skin cells off of our epidermis, and they're just kind of like floating to the ground. This is perfectly normal. Like if you have dry skin and you've like scratched yourself and see the little flecks like off your arm as you scratch your arm, those are the dead skin cells that we're talking about here. So it says dust mites feed on dead skin cells that slow from our bodies, and probably potato chips and cookie crumbs too. I mean, I know my stepsons, they leave crumbs everywhere. Dog tries to lick it up all the time, but if the dog doesn't get it, the dust mites will. They live their whole lives in dark cornered dust bunnies, hatching, growing, eating, defecating, which is pooping, mating, and laying eggs. So they're constantly going. They're everywhere, even though you can't see them. Absolutely disgusting, but really cool at the same time. It's their bathroom habits that make us itch and wheeze. So think about that. They're like going pee and poo on you and around you. And if you're getting itchy, that's one of the reasons. It's the dust mites. If you have asthma or trouble breathing, it's the dust mites. Many people develop severe allergies to dust mite droppings. So again, this is like if you're allergic to dust, you're actually allergic to the poop from dust mites. Lie on a rug where they live and you might get itchy red bumps on your skin. Yes. Breathe in dust and you may have more serious symptoms like difficulty breathing or even a severe asthma attack, like I said. And then this is a little like, what is that, a GIF of a dust mite? So this is what they look like. They're like creepy crawly little tiny things that are everywhere and they can cause these issues. So that's fun, right? So if you are curious about why you might get red bumps from dust mites, like if you are allergic to them, it says just under our skin are capillaries. Those are blood vessels carrying blood with its circulating red blood cells and a variety of white blood cells. So red blood cells are like your basic blood cell. They deliver oxygen to your cells. The white blood cells are your immune system. Just outside of the capillaries, those small blood vessels, in the tissue of the dermis, which is your skin, lurk specialized immune cells called mast cells. So in your skin, you have a white blood cell called a mast cell. It is part of your immune system. When we get itchy red bumps on our skin from contact with an allergen, so in this case, the dust mite droppings, it is due to how our mast cells respond to the allergen. Which is, that's interesting. I have eczema, or I've had eczema my entire life. I've managed it through diet in terms of having some allergies to foods, but that's interesting too in terms of like if you get it again. Okay, anyway, I should explain the picture, I'm sorry. So here's like our dust mite poop right here, and here's all the little like allergen causing stuff. This is, it looks like some red blood cells. This would be your mast cell, your white blood cell. And so basically these things right here attach to these things right here, and your white blood cell is like, not today. No itchy today. That's what's going on here. So a continuation of the red bumps. Mast cells are covered with molecules called immunoglobulin E antibodies. So that's what these things are right here. Antibody is a type of, it's not a cell, it's a type of molecule used in your immune system. These are antigens, or there are antigens in dust mites. So antigen is like the thing that the antibody is reacting to. It's the signal saying this does not belong in our bodies. So there are antigens in the dust mites in their droppings and shed exoskeletons. So exoskeleton, they have their bones on the outside of their body. That's why when you like crunch on a bug, you hear that like, because you're crushing their skeleton. Exo just means on the outside. Once these antigens get under the skin of an allergic host, the antigens cause mast cells to go berserk, releasing histamine, which leads to localized leakage of fluid from capillaries, hence the itchy red bumps. Basically, it's creating a inflammation response, and so that's why you have the bumps, because it's inflamed, it's expanding, and it's itchy, red, irritated. Excellent. Anyway, so This is all in relation to dust mites, creepy crawly, all over the place. Excellent. Like I said, we're just under 100 times magnification of the human eye. Let's keep going. Oh, there it is. So just in case you didn't see it, here are our dust mites. We're zooming in on this little speck right here. Here we are. Keep going, and we're going to ragweed pollen. So this is a pollen cell from a ragweed plant. This is actually what a lot of people are allergic to if you have allergies to pollen. So all that like green gunky stuff that gets all over the streets and the cars in springtime, it's all made out of these types of cells, and this is what people are allergic to. Now, pollen in general, so this is from a ragweed plant, but pollen in general is basically like so for plants, for flowers, when they create pollen, that's basically their sperm cells. So I'll let you think about that on your own time. Now, let's zoom in a little bit more. I should mention we're just over 1,000 times magnification now, so these things are like really itty bitty tiny. But let's zoom into a lymphocyte. So we moved in just a little bit more. We're between 1,000 and 10,000 times magnification. I'd put us right around like a 3 or a 4,000. But this is a lymphocyte. This is a type of white blood cell that's part of your immune system. Now, we also, if we zoom in just a little bit more here, so I'd say we're about like 5,000 to 6,000 times magnification. These are your red blood cells. So notice they do have a slightly different shape. I call them kind of like a donut shape. So they're like round, but they're like pressed in a little bit in the middle, kind of like a jelly donut. So red blood cells, obviously in your blood, their job is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide either to your cells or away from your cells. And then let's look at the baker's yeast. So this is the type of cell. Yeast is a protist, I believe. I'm going to go with that. It might be considered an animal. Anyway, you use yeast when you bake bread and other types of baked goods. And so it's this little guy. The reason why we use yeast in baked goods is that they produce carbon dioxide, which creates the bubbles in the air in your baked goods. All right, let's keep going. Zoom in. All right, we did baker's yeast. E. coli, this is a fun one. So we're at 10,000 times magnification. So this is like itty bitty tiny. Need a really good microscope in order to see this. Now, E. coli is a type of bacteria. Bacteria cells are generally less complex than animal cells or plant cells or other types of cells. We're going to get into that in more detail a little bit later. But E. coli is a fun one because it's actually, again, absolutely everywhere. So you have E. coli lining your intestinal tract from mouth to anus. Everybody's E. coli is slightly different. It's meant to be there. It helps you digest your food. But keep in mind that when you have to go poop, so when your feces comes out, E. coli is covering your feces. Now, of course, you're not like touching your poop when you go poop, but what you haven't thought about necessarily is that when you have to wipe when you're done, no matter how careful you are, how clean you are, you're gonna get just a little itty bit on your hands, okay? So let's just accept the fact that, this happens to everybody. Like I said, this is completely natural. But you do get just a little bit on your hands. Now, like I said, everybody's E. coli is slightly different. So my body's E. coli is different than your body's E. coli, and that is perfectly okay. So here's the deal with E. coli. Like I said, now that I have it on my hands, maybe I go wash my hands, but I don't wash them well enough. I mean, if you think about it, how many times are you really standing at the sink, washing your hands in hot water with soap, like scrubbing with soap under hot water for at least 90 seconds? Let's be real here. Maybe we're doing it more because of COVID, but we're not doing it every single time. So some of that E. coli is left on our hands. Now you're going around touching things in your house. Maybe we're at school and you're like touching your friends' stuff, like they give you a pencil or like you borrow their phone or something. So now you've transferred your E. coli to some of their stuff. When they go and they pick up that stuff, they are now touching your E. coli. Now, when you go to lunch or meal or whatever, maybe you're just like playing with your face or something, you're taking your E. coli that you touched from your friend and you are sticking it towards your mouth. So the idea is not only are you constantly putting other people's E. coli in your mouth, let's think about where the E. coli came from too, but the idea is that if that E. coli doesn't necessarily agree with your body, that's when you can get stuff like the runs or explosive diarrhea. You'll see this a lot in supermarkets when they recall fruits and vegetables, and this is because the people that go and like pick the fruits and vegetables, they have very poor working conditions. Really, I would not wish this on my worst enemy, but they don't have access to a bathroom. So when they need to go number 2, their option is either to like walk a mile or more to like a porta potty and use that, or they can just go where they are in the field. Keep in mind they are paid based off of how much they pick, so they'd be wasting time by walking all the way to the porta potty. So a lot of them do end up going like in the field where they are, which means they are going on your fruits and vegetables, which means they're not able to wash their hands, and then they go back and pick your fruits and vegetables. And so if you're getting an E. coli outbreak, it could be someone else's E. coli that shouldn't be in our bodies. Remember where the E. coli comes from. Anyway, let's keep going. So E. coli, Staphylococcus. All right, so again, we're still at 10,000 times magnification. Staphylococcus is a bacteria that causes a staph infection. You see this a lot in hospitals. It basically is like a skin infection. It's nasty. It can get into your bloodstream, and that's when it can get very, very dangerous. You will see a lot of people in hospitals, especially with a compromised immune system. They will have a very hard time recovering from a Staphylococcus infection. All right, let's zoom in. So these are both bacteria, E. coli and Staphylococcus. Now we're going even smaller, and we're looking at something called viruses. So let's zoom in. There we go. Ebola. Now, viruses are not technically cells. They are not technically alive. However, they do have genetic information. And what they do is they hijack a cell's machinery to produce more viruses. And that's kind of how a virus will get you sick. We will be going into more detail when we do the immune system, but that's sort of the basics. So Ebola virus right here, it's this like worm looking thing right here. I'm sure we've heard of it. It's been in the news semi-recently, but Ebola, very, very fun virus to talk about. So you get this virus in your cell. Now, a couple days in, you're probably feeling flu-like symptoms. So stuffy, runny nose, sore throat, fever, probably like aches and pains. You're not too worried about it, but you're like, I don't feel great. So that's like day 1 and 2. Or I should say, once you get Ebola, it takes about a week for symptoms to start showing up. So from infection to symptoms, that's 7 days. So like day 6, that is when you start feeling a little crappy. So after you get your flu-like symptoms, day 6, or I should say like day 7, day 8, after that, day 9, you are going to start to get some like bloodshot eyes. You might get a bloody nose. You're probably getting some explosive diarrhea. There's probably a little bit of blood in your diarrhea. It's not great. So as we keep going, you're going to continue to feel sicker. You're going to continue to feel worse. At this point, you might start to see like bleeding out of other areas. So like I said, eyes get super, super bloodshot. You might see like a little bit of blood dripping out of the eye. You're really like out of commission. Like you are not getting out of bed at this point. When it starts to get really, really bad, you can start to get like seizures. You can pass out. It's just not a good situation. Now, at the very end of an Ebola infection, especially when it's about to kill you, you are going to start to see that like skin is like peeling off the body. Absolutely disgusting. You're basically bleeding out from the inside. So the Ebola virus disintegrates your blood vessels. And then, like I said, you sort of like have internal bleeding that's happening from the inside. And that's where all the blood is coming from that's coming out of your body. Disgusting, terrible way to die. In the United States, it's not really common, and we do have ways to take care of you if you get it. But if you are going to other locations where it is more common, there is a very, very, very high percentage of death when you get this virus. It is very, very deadly. It kills you in about 2 weeks. So all those symptoms that I described, that's, like I said, that first week is like an incubation period, and then all those symptoms are happening in the second week. Awesome, right? All right, let's keep zooming in. There we go. All right, so we are at 100,000 times magnification, or no, I'm sorry, this is 1,000,000 times magnification. So itty bitty tiny little thing. And we have what is called a rhinovirus. This is very similar to like a flu type of virus, but this itty bitty little thing will make you very, very sick. So just to make sure we are all on the same page, let's zoom back out. So we have our rhinovirus, Ebola virus, we're zooming back out. We can start to see our Staphylococcus bacteria and our E. coli bacteria, or the full name is Escherichia coli. You can just call it E. coli though. So we keep zooming out, and now we see our red blood cells, our white blood cells, our Baker's yeast. We can start to see our pollen again. We keep going. Oh, here are our dust mites. Here's the human hair going across. And if you forgot, this is all happening, or this all fits on the top of a nail head. So these things don't all live there. It's just that they all fit together on the top of a nail head. And that's just to show you like how small cells actually are. So let's get into the different types of cells. We have a prokaryotic cell, which is a bacteria cell. And the examples were, what did we have? We had the Staphylococcus bacteria and what was the other one? Why can't I remember it? And the E. coli bacteria. So those are both prokaryotic cells. They have no membrane-bound organelles. So this is a picture of a prokaryotic cell. Like I said, they do have this nucleoid is talking about some genetic information in here. They do have some ribosomes, which makes protein. And they do have a cell membrane. In this case, the prokaryote has a flagella, which is a little tail it uses to move around. Now, a prokaryote is synonymous with bacteria. So if you see bacteria cell or a prokaryotic organism, it means the same thing. It's talking about this type of cell right here. Eukaryotes are you. You are a eukaryote. You have eukaryotic cells. So these are animal cells. We are animals. These are plant cells. These are fungi cells. And these are protist cells. And the main defining feature is that all of these types of cells, so our cells, because remember, you are a eukaryote, all of our cells, they have membrane-bound organelles, and that's what you're seeing over here. So hopefully you remember some of these words. We are going to be going into more detail, but we have like a nucleus, we have mitochondria, we have ribosomes, we have an endoplasmic reticulum, a Golgi apparatus, we do have a cell membrane as well. But we have these like packages of things inside of the cell called organelles that do specific jobs inside of the cell. So to get into just a little bit more detail about prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, over here we have all the features of a prokaryote or a bacteria cell. So like I said, there are no membrane-bound organelles. They do have a nucleoid, which is where the DNA or genetic information is located, and they tend to reproduce very, very quickly and asexually. So what this means is asexual reproduction is they are producing a clone of themselves. So when they make a new cell, most of these are unicellular. They're made out of one cell. So prokaryotes, when they reproduce, they basically like grow another one of themselves. It splits, and now you have two identical cells. That's asexual reproduction. Now, like I said, you are a eukaryote. So we are talking about your cells. Eukaryotes, they have a nucleus, they have membrane-bound organelles. We're going to go into more detail about like what an organelle is and all the different types. Eukaryotes are generally larger than prokaryotes because we have more stuff inside of the cell. And what this means is that our cells reproduce a little bit more slowly because there's more stuff. So when we have to make a new cell, we also have to make all the new stuff. Now, eukaryotic organisms, they can reproduce asexually or sexually. Asexual reproduction for a eukaryote is going to be very similar to how prokaryotes reproduce. And then you guys should understand how sexual reproduction works at this point in your life. So my example of a eukaryotic organism is my cat down here. This is Harvey. Yeah, he's my baby. And then down here, these are bacteria cells or prokaryotic cells, just to give you an idea. There are 3 similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So all cells in the entire world, all cells share 3 things. All cells will have DNA, all cells will have ribosomes, and all cells will have a cell membrane. Like I said, we're going to be going into more detail about what this stuff actually is. And then the last part, I've been talking about like a unicellular versus multicellular. So uni means one. So unicellular is an organism made out of one single cell. And then multicellular, multi means many. So multicellular organisms are made out of more than one cell. So again, here's a picture of a unicellular eukaryotic organism. So this cell right here actually has different cell organelles inside of it. So this is just an example of a eukaryote that is unicellular. But if we look over here, we can also compare prokaryotes to eukaryotes. Like I said, all prokaryotes are going to be unicellular. So this is oh no, I'm sorry. This is an example of a unicellular eukaryote because there are cell organelles in here. And then over here we have a bunch of different varieties of multicellular organisms. So plants, animals, fungi like mushrooms. Yeah. All right. So at this point, you should have been able to fill out some of your vocab notebook. You should have unicellular and multicellular filled out. You should have prokaryote versus eukaryote filled out. These are all different types of cells. Yep, prokaryote, eukaryote. And then also, I believe you need to have the definition of a cell and cell theory. So those are the words you should be focusing on in your vocab notebook at this point. In the next video, we are going to be going into detail comparing eukaryotic cells, specifically plant cells and animal cells.